to sit on, man. We ready to rock and roll.
All right. Get out of your way. What's this? Okay. Hold the bottom of that for me. Great.
Both of y'all in there?
Yeah.
You both?
Here we go. Closer here. Man, that music sounds good, man.
Yeah.
Oh,
RadioNext.tv. You are listening to Warp and Wolf Radio live from RadioNext.tv, Collaborate 317 studio. And we do have in studio with us right now Mr. George Middleton. And that last tune that you just heard, George, you might as well introduce it yourself, brother.
Well, that was
Intervisions. Pull that mic up on you, man. I know this is all new.
Yeah.
This is all new, baby.
Yeah, man. All these gadgets, man, microphones, cameras, technology. What are we going to do without them, right?
Yeah, the science of how you do things, and that's what we're doing
Yes, sir.
here. Today's show, Dr. Mark, and I'm going to let you guys get in, because this is a great, great guest that you have today, but we're talking about music, the messaging and mentality today, man, and that first segment was hot and heavy. You got me in, but take this show over, man.
Yeah, that's great. We're really glad to have George Middleton here with us this afternoon, this morning, and talking about some really important stuff, specifically as it relates to the unconscious, the subconscious, and how do we form mindsets. So let's just start, real easy, George, and tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, your church, your life experiences, how you fit into the Indianapolis community. Just kind of give us an overview of yourself.
Okay, well, briefly, again, well, not again, but initially, thanks for having me on your show and to celebrate your grand opening here at your new spot. It is amazing. I'm a graduate of the IU School of Music. I'm a musician. I'm also a graduate of Indiana Wesleyan University from the School of Management. And then I also am a graduate of Capella University in the School of Human Services in mental health field. I'm single. I have a grown daughter who I still consider my baby girl. Something about those girls, they just get you. When you hear that first daddy, you're done. So she's grown and successful and working, but she knows she can still tap daddy. In terms of my spirituality, it's always in transformation. From my early years to my late adulthood stage of life. It's like a process of maturing from baby food to, adult food, and it's increasing in spiritual self-awareness. In terms of work, primary work in a variety of all those fields that I went to school for, as a musician, as a therapist, and most recently as an author promoting a book that I feel is relevant to today's condition.
This is fantastic stuff, man. You got a lot of numbers and letters after your name there with all those degrees and all those places you've been to school. That's pretty impressive stuff. And I get it about the whole daughter-daddy bit, man. They just melt your heart, don't they?
Yes.
My little one she's 31, has a couple of her own, but doggone, I still call her a little one. How's
That's
that?
it.
So we're going to talk about your book. We're going to talk about your work, counseling, talk about your music. But let's just begin with an overview of all of this and explain how a Christian viewpoint impacts your work.
Okay. Yeah, that's an excellent place to start. I like to preface it by saying, and I lead this out in my book, that beliefs are more powerful than facts. And I think if you look at the state of society today, look at our political environment, look at our religious environments, you can tell somebody they can be looking right at something and call it something totally different based on their beliefs.
Yes.
So at this point in my work, I don't focus on what is right or what is wrong, or what's true or what's false. I focus on what a person believes.
Okay.
Because I need to know where that person is at in order to help them get to an effective stage. So I like to get out of the right and wrong aspect of conversations and get into, is it working for you or is it not working for you?
It was interesting, in the first hour we were talking about the SPUD test, how something is sensible, practical, universal, and dependable. And it sounds like what you're talking about here is when you approach your counselors, or when you approach your counselees, these are the folks that you're interested in seeing some practical engagement with. Where are you at? Where do you want to be? How are you going to get there? Would you say that that's kind of where you're coming from?
Yeah. That's very accurate.
Yeah. How about what kind of a psychological profile do you bring to the table? Do you use a certain method or certain tools? Where is it that you're coming from?
Well, my theoretical orientation is cognitive behavioral theory. And it's basically a process where we help the client to be more aware of their negative, repetitive thought process. Because typically that's where you can connect the ineffectiveness of whatever action you decide to take. It's basically on how you're thinking. You know, I'm not a scriptural expert, but the scripture that says, whatsoever man thinketh in his heart, and in many ways we are unconscious about our thought process.
That's right.
But yet, even though we're unconscious, we are still responsible.
That's right.
For our thought process.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's easier, especially in a religious dogma, to blame that ineffectiveness on some external force, because it's easier to look at it like that from a moralistic point of view rather than a self-accountable point of view of, can I possibly be responsible for the current conditions in my life?
Yeah. Well, you've hit the nail on the head. You're quoting Proverbs 4 there, and that's exactly the point, that we have this conscious thought process that really is coming from an unconscious, the things that we've already set ourselves to believe, the assumptions that we bring to the table. What are some of the assumptions, would you say, are some of the most detrimental that you see in people's thinking, just generally speaking? What are some of the bad things you see?
Well, the premise of my book right now is based on we're in a battle between our religious beliefs and our beliefs on race. And so as a therapist, most of my clients their negative behaviors are associated with, they may not realize it, but with their beliefs about themselves and others from a race paradigm. And even in a religious paradigm, race is inextricably integrated in that process, which really confuses the whole meaning of what Christianity is about. So I just see that theme of our belief system right now about race, which is right in our face right now, from the president on down to Black Lives Matter to all these other organizations. Everything right now is making us have to deal, and I'm hoping that we're going to really step up to the challenge and deal with this race issue, because I think it is the umbrella over all of the ills that we're going through in this great country, because this is a great country.
It is a great country. Since you mentioned this, one of our next week's guests is going to be Dr. Posley from Antioch Baptist. And he and I are going to be talking about the oneness issue, the John 17, I want my people to be one. Q Commons is coming in next week as well. They're dealing with how do we heal the racial divide. So you're speaking about something that's really personal, practical right now. Tell us a little bit about your book, maybe about how it got started. You've given us kind of an umbrella overview of what the book is all about. But maybe why did you invest in this book? What got you going into it? Some of the assumptions maybe that you brought to the table in this.
Well, I realized when I started this work, the process of the book, I realized that I had been writing this book for a while. Because when I went back over all of some of my previous works that I've written, it was like, wow, I was doing this on more of a subconscious level, but it's like when I looked at that, I realized that there was something spiritual happening with me that's leading me to this direction. And I would say that the genesis of that happened when I was not as aware as I am now. And I still have a long way to go with regard to self-awareness. But when I graduated from college, I graduated from School of Music, I didn't initially run right into my chosen passion of performing and entertainment. I got into what I call the safe environment, right? Because all your parents would say, you know, go get you a real job to have something to fall back on in case you don't go platinum, right? So that's what I did, thinking that was a safe environment. But I didn't realize how violent the corporate organized work environment was. Just because people put on shirts and ties and suits and have, you know, degrees behind them. Man, I took some hits in there. And what it did was it exposed in me my thought process of who I thought I was. And it also exposed in them the way they perceived me and the way they perceive themselves. And that connecting theme on both sides, because it's a dance. You know, we're both a part of this. You can't point fingers at just one side. Is race. The way we believe about race. You know, quick example, when my first job going in corporate America, because that was the time when, well, I guess they still do it, but it was kind of fresh then, where if you had the degree, but you didn't have the experience, they would still hire you because you had the degree.
Right.
And so I got hired in a position because of my degree over two experienced people that didn't have the degree.
Okay.
And they were two white females. And one really had an issue with me being in a supervisory position.
Wow.
And I don't know if she was conscious of it, and I wasn't really conscious of it until we just started having these conflicts. And then it just came to a head one day when we had a meeting, and I'm giving out the week's agenda, and she said, you know, you sure use a lot of big words for a black guy.
Oh, my word. Oh, gee.
And, you know, I was speechless. I didn't even know how to respond to that. And so that kind of just started me down a path, because here's the thing. That is such an internal statement.
Oh, yeah.
And if I wasn't at the time, if you're not aware of who you are, if you're not aware of your triggers, you can internalize other people's issues about you.
Yeah.
And so now I'm carrying this baggage. I'm trying to figure it out, you know, and it just set me down this process to where now I'm recreating those environments. At this point, you know, it happens enough where I start believing it, right? Because again, it's about beliefs. And I'm recreating these scenarios in various ways. And it was easy at the time for me to say, you know, they keep doing this to me. They keep doing that to me. But after about the fifth scenario that I went through that, I had to stop and say, what am I doing? And so once I became aware of that and took responsibility for something that I was initially blaming other people for, that I'm more aware of when those possibilities are happening. And it hasn't happened to me since, because I'm now aware of it. But that is kind of what started me down this process of putting this material together, because experiencing the world from a paradigm of color, and based on whatever color you are, because we all are being impacted by this color process. And then getting into the mental health field, I realized that that's a strong connection. It's about the mind. You know, racism is about the mind, about how you believe, about how you think. And it doesn't matter if you're black or white, if you're basing, and this is what the premise of the book is, if you're basing your life through a color spectrum, you're probably having some ineffective and dysfunctional aspects in your life on some level.
Man, it sounds like an awful lot of great threads that are running through that particular fabric in your book, and it certainly sounds, obviously, coming right out of Genesis 3, that our real problem is one of sin, and our sinfulness, our human nature, the internal subconscious beliefs that we're bringing to the table is what the problem is for us.
And I would like to sub-impose or impose the word ineffective for sin.
Okay.
Not to take away the substance of the word sin from a religious aspect, but in terms of helping people get from one stage to the next, you have to kind of compartmentalize the issue. Instead of attacking it from a moral standpoint, attack it from an effective standpoint.
So from your vantage point in your bailiwick where you operate with the folks, your clients, you have to begin there.
Yes.
Yes, I get it. Okay. This is great conversation, folks. If you're at all interested, not only in counseling, but in music and understanding how beliefs impact your person, maybe you don't even realize the kinds of things that you're thinking and how they influence your day-to-day life. This is the place to be. We're going to bring this out on the podcast later on today. It'll be up. You can hear this again for those who might have missed it. Some of the folks have actually texted me and messaged me ahead of time saying, hey, can I listen to this later? And I said, sure. We'll make sure that that happens. You're listening to Warp and Woof Radio. We come to you every Wednesday from 10 until noon. We're going to take a short break and be right back.
George Middleton gone fishing. Good stuff.
I appreciated the descriptor where you talked about not wanting to do the moral thing right away, that you hit people where they're at. Because guys like me, the theologians, you know, we're all about, okay, we got to bring this theological thing,
right.
But you're on the front lines with folks that hear things differently than.
Because you know, to bring anybody into your way of thinking, you have to, like you said, you have to get to where they are.
Yeah.
And then when you're dealing with a belief system, you're dealing with a spiritual system, a religious system. That is such a personal thing, and it's more about being the example, so they'd be curious, like, man, what is it about you? By the way the interaction is, versus coming back with this book like, thus saith the Lord. You know, I'm not saying he didn't say it, but it's about process. It's about how you're coming to that person.
Right. And people obviously may not be believers, so, you know, there's that too.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. No, this is really helpful. I think it's going to be helpful for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
Where do you want to go next segment?
All your questions are good. I'm good.
All right. Well, you know, you could tell. Obviously, I was riffing there, so
yeah,
you know,
you're good, man.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
You play an instrument?
Way back in the day when I was a kid, I used to play trumpet, but not anymore. Okay.
Yeah,
but I love music.
Tag me in that video, man. You got time? I'll just go get on your page.
Yeah, get on it, because
I got you. Don't need to move anything.
I want to say thanks for all the people that are listening in on the conversation. Shayna Vaughn, Jacqueline Golden, what's up, baby girl? I see you. Loretta Allison, I saw you at the beginning. Thanks for being part of it. Also, if you have some comments or something, I'm looking, so if you want to add something here, I'll try to get it in if you have a question or a statement you want to add to it.
So this is Mom. That's what she said.
You guys are very cool together.
84-year-old.
HB and Mark.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
She's something.
How old is your mom?
84.
84. She looks like she's pretty good shape, too.
She is, yeah. Yeah, the secret is, she tells me, you just got to keep moving.
Yeah.
All right, let's. Why don't we go ahead to talk about 3 and 4, about the message becoming the method of delivery.
Great.
I really like that.
Great.
What we were talking about there, and then number 4 about verbal visual connections. I think is a powerful idea.
What's up, David Taylor? What's up, Melanie McGee? I see y'all.
Much
Thanks for hanging out.
About 2.5 minutes.
Big Dino.
All right, I'll be right back.
Right on, bro. Back at you.
Hey, man, can I get the copyrights to play this?
I got you, bro.
Now, my next thing is to make all the shows have a local theme song. Your music, Rodney, you know, every song I bring in, we're going to be pouncing that flavor of it. Our own artists.
Yeah. I like it, man.
Yeah.
You on the creative side of life right now, man.
Yeah.
Come over here so my people can see you, man.
What's up, my people?
Jumbo Love up in this mucker.
I know the screen can't take two bald-headed black men at the same time.
You know, you're getting some compliments out there about being handsome, too. So I said, I'm going to stay on that side of the camera, but love y'all. Keep doing this. Now the women's talking about you fine.
Hey, I want you to look at this book and just go through it if you got some, just to like ask questions about the book.
Black knowledge.
Black knowledge.
Ain't no worse than the creative mind, boy.
That's the book we're going to be discussing, everybody.
Okay.
HB, I am totally impressed with you, man. I mean, you're like a living example. I mean, because I know where you started at.
Yeah.
And you haven't gone back at all,
At least you not think, baby. You know.
You haven't gone back at all.
About 40 seconds. Yeah, Joe Sinell an invite to come on out Saturday morning, man. If you're not doing anything, I'm kicking off Jumbo. This to be the first Jumbo Love show, so I'm just going to invite all now everybody out here doing community work and all that.
Yeah.
Just come on out and for 4 hours. We ain't gonna number to introduce the community to this new place and you know where we going. We're going to go. We're going to have a movement of like-minded.
Yes.
If we do that, we can accomplish. But the separate stuff.
Yes.
You ready, Mark?
I'm ready.
Bring it in.
And we are back. You're listening to Radio Next at the Cool Groove site, Warp and Woof Radio. We come to you every Wednesday from 10 until noon, and we are here today with George Middleton. And we have this great interplay going on with not just the concept of music, but also about counseling and the subconscious mind, what's going on in our belief systems. And we wanted to take this, kind of ratchet it up just a little bit and talk about these connections that are being made, not just in terms of beliefs, but also in terms of how do we communicate these beliefs. So, George, one of the great questions you and I had a discussion about when we were having lunch together was how much of any message is the method of delivery? How much of any message is the method of delivery? How can you explain that to our audience, the importance of a message being a method of delivery?
Well, it's really tied or strongly connected with one of your earlier questions on the first half of the show, which was describing what the word mindset means. And if you look at the word mindset, it's composed of two words, mind and then set, right? So there's a subject, and then there seems to be some action with regard to that subject. And the reason I'm going into this is because these systems that we're discussing that are relevant to this topic, media, music, religion, there's a profit motive in all of those. So the questions that I want to pose to you are questions that they already understand the science of. They know this. And statistically, they're counting on our ignorance of these answers, of this thought process, because it's profitable to them. It's not about right or wrong. It's about how do we make money? How do we make this business successful?
Okay.
And many successful business people are able to compartmentalize their morality versus the business paradigm, right? And many of us, like the NFL piece is a major dilemma right now. But if you're in them, if you're in the shoes of the NFL owners, they're coming totally from a monetary motive, right? So, mindset. So I want to pose this question. What does the mind look like? Has anybody ever seen the mind? Just think about that. And there's no right or wrong answers. It's just things for you to think. Where does thought come from? Really think about that. Where does thought come from? Is thought something that happens, or is thought something you do? Right? If thought is something you do, what is the next thought you're going to think? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Can you choose not to have thoughts? Can you say, I'm not going to have the thought? And how easy is it for you to do that? So, when I want to just challenge our lack of awareness with regard to what systems know, because they base their businesses off of questions like these. Worldview. How were you when you developed your worldview? And did you develop your worldview, or was your worldview developed?
Right.
And these are things that we all have to individually go back and do some self-awareness homework on.
One of the things that strikes me as you say these things is the issue of culture, and how culture is going to invade how we think about life and things. I was just teaching this in a church class that I teach on Sundays, and the idea that somehow we think that we can bypass our context, the culture from which we were born in. So, I grew up in a rural setting out in the country. That's going to be totally different than if you grew up in the city.
Right.
It's going to be different for me as a white man versus you as a black man. It's going to be different for the rich and the poor. Right. All of those kinds of things are cultural investments. And so what you're suggesting then is that those cultural investments do make up how we think in our mind.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then if you're coming from a business standpoint, here's where they are. Their question is this: which is the better of the two? To go out and look for customers, or to create your customer? Total different paradigm.
Yeah, absolutely.
And many of us are not aware that that's happening. So that gets into my work in terms of the messaging in the media from a mental health standpoint. So I brought you a couple of handouts here that talks about specifically hip-hop and rap music, because that is such a misunderstood field. As a musician, I can appreciate the talent that it takes. I can appreciate just about any music, because as a musician, I understand the discipline it takes to consciously make a pattern of tones come out of your instrument, whether it's vocally or instrumentally or percussion-wise. Because the power of those tones is what sets up the message, right? I've been a minister of music in my church for most of my work in life, and I understand that my role as the minister of music is to set the emotional tone for the pastor to bring the word. And so, and a lot of times there is conflict a lot of times in a lot of our churches traditionally, between the music department and the pastor, because sometimes the musicians kind of get a big head thinking it's about me, right? And so then they start creating their own fiefdoms and territories, because the power of music can actually, draw people to, or it can draw people away. It's that powerful.
Wow.
And so there has to come a lot of humility with that position. As a jazz musician, if I'm playing for people, if I'm out in the club somewhere, it's about me. So I can go ahead and be all egocentric and push me up. But if I'm in a spiritual environment, I have to be able to put George Middleton to the side and set the emotional tone, the spiritual tone for those that are coming to be fit.
It's interesting when you suggest that music sets the tone. I'm thinking about some very famous lines from a guy as old as Plato, who said, "You can have the laws, give me the music." And his point, of course, is that you can change more minds through music than you can through law.
Yes, that's very, very well said. And that's what's happening in our systems in any type of media format, whether it's television, video games, internet. We are constantly being assaulted with messaging. And because they already know our mindset, they're hitting us with stuff that we can't, unless we're aware, we can't refuse. Because they're just throwing it right on us.
So does this sound vaguely like an addiction?
I wouldn't say an addiction. An addiction is something where, technically speaking, if you are so engrossed in something that it disrupts the stabilizing factors of your life. So that, like the term functional alcoholic, right?
Okay.
He's addicted, but he's functional. So, that's a little subjective, but it's kind of like on that platform. This is more of being vulnerable to influence. which is totally different. It doesn't even matter if you're addictive or not. If you're not able to be consciously protective of the messages that are coming through to you, if you're not aware that someone is actually playing to your predispositions to their benefit, that's a different paradigm.
Oh my! It reminds me of what John said to the folks that he was writing to in 1 John 4:1. He said, "Test the spirits to see if these things are so." So the idea of testing literally meant to hold up a cracked pot to the light of the sun so that you could see the light through the crack and you could expose it for what it was. So it sounds like you're into the exposing issue here. You're helping people expose for themselves these issues that
That's beautifully said, because it's not about telling people what to do.
Yeah.
Right? Because the minute you try to tell someone what to do, their natural instinct, present company included, is to defend against that, because you're coming from a position of superiority, which I may take offense to.
Sure.
Now, I am not as bad on that as a lot of people are, because the work I do humbles me so much that I'm more open to other people's perspectives. So I'm more apt to not be as defensive. But even I have my limits. But the average person, you don't want to come at them from a position of I know more than you, or I'm better than you, or you want to come open spirit, open in heart.
Sure sounds like something Jesus might have said, like, humble yourselves.
Which, self is the hardest piece. Self is the hardest piece. One of the questions that I like to pose for thought when having discussions with, religion and spirituality and politics, because they're all intermeshed. And again, there's no right or wrong answer, but I just like having a conversation because race is so intense right now. It's left versus right, black versus white, Obama versus Trump. I mean, those all three run together.
Yes.
So from a spiritual or religious perspective, I like to pose this question. Of the two, between President Obama and President Trump, which of those two characters most accurately visually display characteristics of Christianity? And what that question would challenge one to do is, how do I separate my political partisan beliefs? How do I separate my racial beliefs from my spiritual or religious beliefs?
So do people actively compartmentalize those things, do you think? Are we trying?
No, they throw them all together.
Do they? Okay.
It's for a lot of people, because it's unconscious, they throw it all together. So if you're already politically inclined to the left or to the right, then your filter is going to bend the information, the facts, again, right? Based on your belief. Your belief filter is going to bend the facts to meet your narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, isn't that always the way? So if we have new knowledge, let's say, for instance, some new knowledge comes forward, and the first thing we're thinking about is how can I fit that new knowledge into the mindset that I already have?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, or how am I flexible enough to revisit my old knowledge and adjust my old knowledge to the new knowledge?
Yeah. And this issue of being right or wrong is really a powerful idea here, because our job is not to cast aspersions or cast judgment on people. I was in a plane once, and the guy asked me, well, when he found out I was a Christian theologian, he said, so are you one of those Christians who believes that if I don't agree with you, then I'm going to hell? And my response was, I smiled and said, man, I'm not in the eternal judgment business.
That's above my pay grade.
Yeah, exactly. So, that kind of let the air out of the balloon, and now we could have a conversation.
Exactly.
So now, if I'm not coming at you, now I'm just sitting at you looking eye to eye, so we can actually have a talk with each other. Wow, that's huge.
That's a total difference, because as you said, you broke down the initial defense, and you respecting him enough to let him make his own choice.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that the truth, though? I mean, when we think about the concept of choice, you used that word a moment ago, let's talk about choice. How do we make choices? You've talked about the issue of belief and how important mindset is, and we do this subconsciously and so on. Is there any way that we can influence people to help them toward a better choice, a good choice from a Christian vantage point? Is there any way that we can do that?
Definitely. I mean, because we're having an impact on people consciously or subconsciously. So now we have a choice to make. How conscious do we want to be in the way we're influencing people? There's an old adage that a minister said, I'm sure you've heard of it, but he says, I would rather see a good sermon than hear one.
Oh, boy.
And there is the challenge, right?
Yeah.
Because that means you have to live it. It's like HB was saying in the first segment. He's churching every day. He said, by the time I get to Sunday, I'm churched out, right? So in the typical religious paradigm, traditional religious paradigm, it's the inverse. We put all our holy behaviors on for Sunday, and then Monday we're going out there figuring out who can we do in, you know, or who can we judge, who can we talk about, who can we exclude, who can we discriminate, who can we make policies against that are going to have adverse impact.
Right.
Right.
This raises a question in my mind when I think about what you're suggesting, that this is kind of all rolled into one, all of the different issues that we're facing kind of rolled into one. In theology and philosophy, it's something called syncretism, where you pick and choose. So whatever you pick and choose, and you kind of roll it into this ball, and now that's your philosophy, that's your worldview, that's your mindset. Yes, okay. And so now I'm in charge. Right. But still, it comes back to the same thing, right? You, self, are making a choice to be in charge, to decide, yeah, this is right, this is wrong, because I made the choice.
You made the choice. And then you'd have to question yourself, did you really make the choice? Or did someone make the choice for you?
Yeah.
You know, based on your environments and, you know, your economic situation.
Right.
You know, how control are you really of deciding your own choices?
Well, let's take that to a different level and ask this question about the stories. Maybe, you know, you could tell a story or two, obviously without names, about folks that you have seen come through this process, whether it be negative or positive, good or bad, folks that have made good choices, they've gone back to reconsider the old knowledge again and come up with a new paradigm perhaps, or those who have said, you know what, I saw it, I don't like it, I'm going back to what I was doing before.
Yeah, I've got a lot of clients that I would say I've had some great experiences with, because they were open to changing that story. You know, one of the ways that I try to get my clients to think is the stories that they tell about themselves. So that was a really relevant word you used. Because the more you tell that story, the more you attract and reinforce whatever the condition is.
Okay.
So you have to really be consciously careful about the stories you tell about yourself, because those words are powerful. Words have energy. So whatever you're speaking to yourself about yourself, that's the energy that you're drawing to yourself. You know, and so what I find with the success stories of my clients are the ones that are able to. I had a brother that unfortunately got pulled into the system for abuse because of some inappropriate behaviors with his daughter from a disciplinary standpoint, and that set off a hailstorm of just negative perceptions. He's a black male. He is of strong mind. He is very articulate. You know, that's a key word, right? And he doesn't back down. So that was not a good combination for him in the system of Department of Child Services, where they're determining if they're going to take your children or not.
Okay.
And so I got brought in the middle of the case because he was angering everybody. And so he had gotten that violent or aggressive black male status. So I was able to help him reframe his responses. I said, I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm not saying you're right. I'm not saying you're wrong. But right now, here is your stigma. Do you believe that your current way of responding is improving it or worsening it? And I was just taking through a series of self-assessments to the point where he started adding more tools to his arsenal. And it was a struggle, but he did it. I mean, because I had to go through some times where he would go off on me, right? And I realized that anytime my client is angry at me, it's not about me. And that's one of the freeing things about being trained in the mental health field is it's improved the way I do my personal relationships. Because when I'm in arguments now with anybody, whether it's a loved one, a friend, if I'm on social media, if I'm texting or in a chat group, and people get angry, I know it's not about me. I know something was triggered in them. And so then I try to find and try to help them become aware of whatever that is. And so that's what he did. And unfortunately, the momentum of his negative behaviors were too, and me coming in the middle of the case, they were too overwhelming for the other service providers to get over.
Okay.
So he's probably going to end up not losing his daughter.
Oh, my.
Which is unfortunate, you know, because that was a clash of cultural paradigms, a clash of religious paradigms, a clash of service provider ethics. I thought there were a lot of unethical behaviors on the basis of my professional colleagues for taking things personally, for judging a person who is in an emotional state.
Yeah.
You know, so that was very disappointing to me. But even in the view of all that, he showed tremendous growth and an ability to add to his emotional repertoire of responses.
It strikes me as I hear you talking about this that there seems to be this underlying Christian view that we really need to care about how others hear us and the focus on others rather than self.
Right.
So how would you say, is that part of what you're dealing with, is try to get people to understand how others are hearing them? Is that the idea?
Yeah, I would say that. I think I was on a conversation with a friend of mine. I won't say his name, but he's also a minister. And, you know, we had this conversation about violence. There was an article that was posted that violence is not a product of mental illness, but a product of anger. And by the time I got into the text, I had sent it out, and someone had said, or this person had said, well, it's also a product of evil wickedness, right? So they were attributing violent nature to a moralistic paradigm. And I said, well, my response was, most of the time it's just plain and simple inability to handle emotions in a healthy way. And he said, oh, the contrary, it's a moral issue. That was his mindset. It's a moral issue. And when we put psychological, sociological spin on it, we are not only paralyze the participant, but we give him shield and pardon as well. And that statement in and of itself really said a lot about his mindset, because he took his role as, I will administer the consequences to you. I can protect you from and that's not our role. As a minister, as a counselor, that's not our role, because your behaviors are going to set off those consequences. There's nothing you and I can do to shield or reduce those. For every action, there's a reaction. There's nothing you can do. We're not that great. And so I responded, coming from a clinical perspective, there's one major component that will negate any client improvement, and that's judgment. And I think it's harder, or it's more of a challenge for those whose counseling is based from a religious paradigm, because that even though we're not supposed to judge, that's the first thing we do. You know, in most of our religious environments, we're trying to show our visual justification for saying we're saved. And then we'll start trying to out-save each other. Well, I'm more saved than you, you know, or look at her, look what she's wearing. She ain't saved. I saw you in the club last night. I know about you, you know, so we're doing the visual test of each other rather than staying focused on you.
Sounds vaguely like stuff we read all the way through Scripture, where folks are too much concerned about the external instead of the internal.
Yes.
But it leads me then to come back to what you're suggesting here about the moral and the clinical and the relational and the psychological. All of these things are threaded through what we're dealing with, it would seem, that we should think about these things in terms of synthesis. So we're seeing all of these aspects of the human person come together to make up who they are, to make up their mindset. It's not one thing.
I love that, man.
Yeah.
Will you write that down as soon as you That was beautiful.
I think you and I just need to sit down and write another book. What do you think?
That was beautiful.
Yeah. Well, this synthesis issue is really a powerful concern. Our synthesis needs to speak against this synchronization that we have going on, that somehow we just pick and choose, and that we have a concern for others above everything else. Well, we're coming down toward the end of our show today, and I always ask folks the same thing whenever you're on the show with me. What would you like to leave the folks today? What are some thoughts you'd like to suggest to them?
Okay, first of all, the book I'm promoting is called Black, and the Black is an acronym for Beliefs Limiting Authentic Cultural Knowledge. And the paradigm of the book presents that race in a mental health perspective. And the book is not meant to be just some nice, I got this book and it's some great reading, I'm going to have a cup of coffee. Right away, it's an action book. Mm-hmm. It's about stimulating action with self, because especially if you are in any type of human service field. Race is our primary issue right now. You can take any aspect of our life, whether it's finance, whether it's politics, religion, police enforcement, NFL. Race is the connecting factor that determines the way we are responding to these systems. So this book is challenging you first to address the racism within yourself. Mm-hmm. Before you can start trying to go out and help people. There are a lot of good programs out here that are doing the external. The platforms are awesome, but this is a mental health scenario. And when I say mental health, people will automatically go to PTSD, go to depression, those are valid pieces, but I'm not talking about that kind of mental health. I'm talking about the day-to-day way of how you see yourself, right? And the more that you can be aware of how you see yourself, that negative self-talk that we all do to each other, to be aware of that, and how we see other people subconsciously. Because even though I may say, Mark Eckel, great guy, but if I see you as a white man versus a man, mm-hmm. my behavior towards you might be unintended mm-hmm. and unconsciously intended mm-hmm. because I'm operating on a subconscious level based on the color that I see mm-hmm. versus the substance of the man. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying let's not look at color. What I'm saying is let's be aware of how we respond to color.
There you go.
That's a different paradigm. Mm. So I want to collaborate and get together with as many groups that are out there to facilitate the how to the platforms that are out there.
Mm. Sure sounds like Collaborate 317, that we're drawing folks together. What do you think about that, HB?
You know how I'm rolling, man. I'm in the midst of my joy. And we have Reverend Charles Harrison getting ready to come up with the 10-Point Coalition. They're doing some great things that we want to announce as well, man. Great show today, my brother.
Thank you so much. You're listening to Warp and Woof Radio. We come to you every Wednesday from 10 until noon on the RadioNext.tv Cool Groove site. Next week, we are going to have Dr. Posley with us. We'll talk about oneness. What does it mean for black and white churches to be one? And then also Q Commons, where we're going to be discussing the national issues that we've raised even today with George Middleton, and that is, how do we heal the divided nation? You're listening to Radio Next at the Cool Groove site, Warp and Woof Radio.
Could I say one other thing?
Oh, please.
My book is available on Amazon.com. I just have people asking, where's the book? It's available on Amazon.com, so go get it.
There it is, and it's a great book. I love the cover of it as well, something that immediately draws you in. Thanks again, George, for being here with us today.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, HB.
Yes, sir.
Blessings on your day, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Good show, gentlemen.
Awesome.
Man, that was fantastic.
Beautiful, man.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So we've got everything on podcast, and so all of the words we just used, We'll put that in the
We'll
book.
get 'em. Do it. Thank you, H.
Come on, baby, right on. Remember my brother.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks for hanging out. Thank you, Destiny. I see you.